Alright, this is lesson 1.2, Exploring Life. As you'll see in Buzz, this lesson mostly covers just some basic science concepts, really just focusing around the scientific method, what's a theory, what's a law. So most of this information may be old news to you. You've probably seen this in just about every science course, but maybe you haven't, or maybe it's been a while, so we're just going to refresh a few things. Especially the scientific method. Again, I know you've probably seen this a lot, but it's just really important that you're able to apply these steps, not only just for the purposes of labs, because we will be doing some labs in class, but just as you approach any scientific problem, just being able to break it down and really understand what you're doing in each step, especially writing a hypothesis, constructing your experiment, looking at your results, really analyzing what you're doing in each of those steps. It may seem kind of basic, as well, what I just went over, but really we're going to be diving into each of these steps a little bit more. I'm going to expect you to be able to break them down further, especially when you're explaining yourself during the labs. Also, if you take any tests, especially the ACT Aspire, or if you decide to work in a science-related field, you're going to have to take each of these steps in the scientific method and be able to break it down further, really make sense of what you're doing in each of those steps, be able to support each of your steps with evidence. We'll be looking at different types of evidence, how to recognize good scientific evidence, evidence that's maybe not well supported. So we'll take a look at that here in this lesson. So let's get started. So what is science? Really, science is just looking for ways to explain what's going on in the world around us. Really, you are science. Your body is science. How you function is science. So really, you are a walking piece of science, if you want to look at it that way. Maybe that's kind of weird, but really, you are science. You're also a miracle. But really, how your body works inside it all comes down to science. Science asks questions. The questions that you'll be asking in this science class, they must be testable. So think about, what's a testable question? What do I mean by that? If you can't test it, then it's not a scientific question. Scientific questions, they have to be supported. And what are they supported by? They're supported by evidence. And evidence are the supporting details that you may encounter, maybe from someone else's research, maybe another experiment that was done. Evidence is something that can be built up over time. All right, this here is just making you think of some questions, some possible questions. When you look at each of these pictures, what kind of questions could you ask? When you're looking at this picture here, you might think of, which way to go? Which path do I want to take? Which road do I want to go down? It's kind of a philosophical question, possibly. When we look here at the explosion, you might ask a question, what happened here? Or how did this happen? Where did this take place? Music? What kind of music do you like? How is music created? What influences music? This picture here is just showing you cell division, what normal cell division looks like, normal mitosis, and what happens when cell division goes wrong. When cell division goes wrong, you may end up with cancer. Cancer really does stem from cells multiplying erratically. It's what can cause cancer, cause tumors to build up in your body. So you may ask, how does this happen? Why does it happen? What are the contributing factors? Scientific reliability, this is going back to talking about evidence or sources that are scientifically reliable, meaning they're trustworthy, they're credible sources. These are the type of sources or evidence that you will want to use to support your findings. If you're doing research or if you're writing a scientific paper, you want to use sources that are credible, they're reliable. They've been peer-reviewed. As you see here, I have peer-reviewed in bold. So a peer-reviewed journal is something that is a piece of material, an article, experiment, or research, case study, that's been reviewed by experts in the field. So that's what they'll call a peer-reviewed article or a peer-reviewed journal. That means that the editors or contributors to that resource are typically experts in their field. So whether it be science or literature, philosophy, sociology, really any type. Teacher education is something that I think of when I was going through my program on earning my teaching license. I had to do a lot of research in the field of education, and so a lot of the sources that I used, especially if they were journals, they needed to be peer-reviewed journals. Reliable sources are clearly documented. The reports are usually supported with some type of data, results. It can come from their experiment or case study that they used in the article. And again, this can vary just depending on the type of source that you're looking at, the field of study, what the data looks like or what the results look like. It may not always be the same across different subject fields or content areas. Other reliable sources, you want to look for, did this experiment or research, case study, how many trials did they do? Were there a lot of trials for the experiment? How many times did they complete this experiment? Was the experiment just done one time and they got these results, or did they do the experiment multiple times over to see if they would get the same or similar results? So one question that you want to ask yourself here is, okay, they did this experiment so many times and they got the same or similar results, so does that make it a more credible experiment? Well, sure it does. If they had done a certain experiment and they had got different results, you might not want to trust as much. And we see this a lot. You may see this in commercials on TV where they say multiple trials of this experiment with this pharmaceutical drug ended with these results. You may have heard that on a commercial or something like that, or seen it in the news. So that may indicate that that medicine is pretty good. Again, over time, over decades, sometimes a medicine that we thought was good for us or that was, taking care of the problem it was designed to take care of, has some kind of negative side effect, or people may die or have some type of injury, or it may lead to another type of disease or problem for that person. So just because a certain thing, whatever it may be, or I'm just going to say a type of medication here, doesn't mean that it's always good. It just means that at that particular time they had a lot of evidence that was reliable and credible enough to send that medication out to the public. Reliable sources, we want to look, scientists are supposed to be unbiased. Is that always the case? Does that always happen? Or can we really say, the scientists that wrote this article or did this experiment, they were unbiased? No, we can't. It's really hard to prove that one way or another. But really, scientists should be unbiased when they're conducting an experiment or some type of study. And again, we're looking for groups, multiple groups. We want to see if they're going to get the same or similar results if this experiment or study is repeated multiple times over. So what does a reliable source not look like? A non-reliable source? Opinions, feelings are not reliable sources when it comes to science. People that are biased, groups or companies that are biased, mainstream media, commercials that are biased. So kind of going back to what I was talking about with a medication, so pharmaceuticals, well, certainly these companies that put out these medicines, they're going to have some type of bias, right? Because they're making money and they want to get this medication out to the public so they can continue to make money. So again, you want to look further, look a little bit deeper into your sources. Okay, the pharmaceutical industry is really just a great example of this. If you see a medication coming out, do some further research. See, okay, who tested this medication? What were the groups? Were they somehow connected to the company? Did the company go outside and use research groups or scientists that weren't connected to that company? Because surely that company is going to do all that they can to make this medication, to make that particular medication seem really positive, or that it works. So just want to make sure that you really look into your sources when you're finding sources, or even if you're just reading through information, news articles, wherever it may be. Don't always take it for face value. Always do a little bit of your own research. So the scientific method. This may look similar to what you've seen before. And I don't want you to think of the scientific method as a step-by-step process, and that it's just one that's just linear. We go from the purpose and the conclusion, then it's over. That's not necessarily the case. I want you to think of the scientific method as like a cycle, or just a process that can sometimes lead you to different steps, if you will, within the process. So generally it follows this type of order, but it may not always be the case. It just depends on what happens during the process. So the scientific method, we're just applying a process to find some result, some conclusion. That's our end goal. And there's a few ways that the scientific method will use to get to that result or conclusion. And again, it might start and stop, or start and go back to the beginning. So just keep that in mind. I want you to kind of get away of thinking that the scientific method just starts and then it stops and it's over. That's not really the case in real life. So generally, to start out the scientific method, applying scientific thinking to trying to get some result, it'll start with some type of general observation that you see around you, or that, let's just pretend that we're all scientists here. You notice something in life, or in your life, or someone else's life, or just something happening in the world that you want to know, how is it happening? What effect does it have? If I were to change something, would it make a different outcome? So you've made some kind of general observation. That's your purpose. So what do you want to know? What do you want to find out? So the next step is to do some research about it. So again, we're going to be looking for those credible, reliable sources, those peer-reviewed journals, to research as much as we can into this problem or observation that we've seen. So again, you're going to be looking at research articles, other experiments, different case studies, looking at scientific books just to find more information on the variables or the processes that you're trying to analyze further. And then you're going to create what's a hypothesis. Okay, your hypothesis is a prediction, basically, but really your hypothesis is going to be connected to your research and purpose somehow. So you're not going to start out with a hypothesis. You had to do these two steps first. You start out with a purpose. You noticed something. You wanted to research your observation that you had made. This is what's going to help you create your hypothesis. So your hypothesis, it must be testable. Really have that in bold. It has to be testable. It can't just be an opinion or a feeling. There has to be something that you're testing within your hypothesis. And again, this is a prediction of what you expect to happen with either your problem that you've noticed, you want to change something, you want to find an outcome. So you're doing something to get something. So you're doing something to get something. You're doing some type of experiment to get some type of result. So we want to write a hypothesis. You want to have a statement of, this is what I predict is going to happen. If-then, an if-then statement is a good way to approach writing a hypothesis, or if-then, because, and we'll go into this a little bit further on the next few slides. But just keep in mind that your hypothesis has to be testable. An experiment, that's going to be our procedural part of this whole scientific thinking, scientific method. This is what you're doing. So you have to design some type of test to test your thinking, to test what you think is going to happen. This says confirm or disprove. I really should X that out because I really don't like disprove. Really, you should say support or not support. So let's take that out. Let's scratch this out. Pretend that's not there. So you want to design a test to support, or it's not going to support your hypothesis. Because just because you just experiment one time, maybe your results don't turn out the way you thought they were. So your hypothesis would not be supported. Who's to say that the next time you would do that experiment, or somebody else would do that experiment, it might be supported. So I don't want to use prove or disprove. Really try to stay away from those words in science. Better words are support or not support. Then you're going to analyze your experiment. Okay, you've done all these processes. What happened? What were my results? Analyze what happened at each part of your experiment. This is where you're creating your data tables, your data charts. You're looking at what happened and starting to make some conclusions. And that leads me right into conclusion. So this, again, it says, why was my hypothesis correct? And I don't really like correct or prove or it was proven true. I don't want to say that. We want to say my hypothesis was supported or it was not supported. Why? This is what my analysis told me. This is what my data told me. So I conclude that my hypothesis was supported or not supported. That would be your conclusion. And you want to use some type of scientific evidence or basis as well to go along with your experimental results, your analysis. You could also include that in a conclusion. So this here, again, is just going back over what I just said. I do want to take note of independent variables. When you're writing your hypothesis and within your experiment, you're going to be testing things. So these things are variables. A variable really is just a factor or maybe a condition that can be changed or controlled. A couple different variables that you will see are independent variables, dependent variables, and your control. So independent, if something is independent, it means that it kind of stands on its own in a way. So if you're independent, you're independent from your parents or independent from your guardians or whoever, that means that you don't need them anymore. So when you're 18 and you go out to live on your own, then you become independent. But in science, independent is a changed or a condition or factor. So you really should only be changing one thing in your experiment. That way you can know for sure if what you changed really had an impact on your results. If you're changing multiple things within your experiment, it makes it more difficult to pinpoint why. Okay, so an independent variable is what you are changing. Your dependent variable is the effect of the change factor. So the condition or factor that was affected is your dependent variable. So it depends on your independent variable. So whatever you're changing, the result is going to be your dependent variable. Alright, theories and laws. And actually, I'm just going to check on my PowerPoint because I'm thinking that something didn't paste correctly. I want to move it around. Yeah, let me do that. So I'm going to go back because I had more on writing the hypothesis and I really want to go over that first. So I apologize. I'm going to fix that real quick. So let me move that up and we'll get back to it because I don't want to jump around and come back to it since we're talking about writing a hypothesis. Go ahead and continue that discussion. I think I have one more slide too. Alright, this is the first recorded lecture, so it's not going to go as perfectly as I would like to, right? think that went where I wanted it to go. Okay, I think I want this one first. Nope, I want this one first. Okay. Alright. Here we go. Alright, so let's talk a little bit more about writing a hypothesis. And this is really critical, and we will likely do some mini lessons on just writing a hypothesis, conducting or constructing research questions. So you're going to see this a lot throughout our class. And the reason I really focus on this so much is because from your test scores, students really seem to struggle with the scientific method and really just the whole process of scientific thinking. So we're going to kind of hone in on these parts, and hopefully that'll help you as you continue to take science courses throughout high school. When you take the ACT or SAT, or really just for your life, if you decide to go into scientific related career, you'll really have all of this down pat. So a hypothesis, again, it's just a guess or a prediction about something that you've seen. You're determining some relationship or trend between your variables. So again, your variables, your independent, dependent, and you may have a control variable. Your hypothesis should be based off prior knowledge, observations, or research. So again, your hypothesis is really not just going to come out of nowhere. You have to have some prior knowledge or something that you saw around you, again, that's going to inspire your hypothesis. Your hypothesis needs to be testable. So again, you're testing your independent variable. When I change it, what's going to happen? It needs to be clear, includes, again, your specific variables, and it's related to your observation and your research questions. A hypothesis typically follows a format. This is how I would like you to write hypotheses in this class. It can be written as an if-then statement. So if I do this, if I do blah blah blah, then blah 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 is going to change. So blah 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 will happen. You can also write it as if I do this, so if I do blank blank blank, then this is going to happen because, and after your because is where you would use some type of supporting evidence or prior knowledge that you have that's related to the variables or information included in your hypothesis. So again, your hypothesis is going to have an independent variable and a dependent variable. Your independent variable is your variable, the thing or factor that you're changing in the experiment. So you as a scientist, what you change, so if like you change the temperature, or you're going to be changing the amount of water, or the amount of light, the amount of some type of chemical that's put on something, that is your independent variable. A dependent variable is going to be the variable that changes as a result of changing your independent variable. So what condition or result that you see, what you observe, is going to be that dependent variable. Writing a good hypothesis. So again, this is just kind of summarizing all of that up. I just want to highlight a few things here. Don't use the words it, best, or better. Really avoid those words. I want you to be specific in your hypothesis. So don't just say the thing is going to change in that, and don't use blah, blah, blah like I just said. You want to use specifically what you're changing, what you expect to happen, why. Try to avoid pronouns. Don't use the word it. Like if I do this to it, then it will change. That's not a good hypothesis because I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't use your reasoning to say because it is best or because it is better. That doesn't make any sense. That's not scientific. Just really be as specific as you can in your hypothesis, and I think you'll be okay. Again, choose one item, one independent variable that you're going to change. Be clear on it and how you're going to compare it with your other choices. Again, you don't have to really include that in your hypothesis. I can see where that would be confusing. But this is just more of a mindset, thinking to yourself, why are you choosing the independent variable that you chose? Good words that you can use in your hypothesis: tallest, shortest, longest, quickest. These are good adjectives to use within your hypothesis: more than, less than, strongest. It's a good way to describe why you think something is going to happen. All right, so we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk a little bit about theories and laws. This is also included in lesson 1.2. Theories are subject to change. So when we see a theory in science, and usually it's indicated as a theory, like cell theory, evolutionary theory, they're subject to change. And what that means is that it's not considered something that's 100% solid. So it means that sometimes new evidence is going to arise over decades, maybe if not, it could be longer, from experiments or other research that scientists are doing, and it may change that theory a little bit. Theories are broad explanations of why things happen in the natural world. Theories are widely accepted by scientists and people in the world. Laws are also widely accepted by scientists, mathematicians, people in the world. But theories, they are subject to change. Laws, on the other hand, are very detailed explanations of what happens or does not happen in the world. So like the law of gravity is a good example. Typically with laws, we see a mathematical equation to show a relationship. These laws are universally observable, so wherever we were to apply this law, we would see it happen, if that makes sense, in the world. And laws are typically not going to change. And this is really mostly because they're related to some type of mathematical principle. Alright, so applying the scientific method, I have just a scenario here for you that you can look at and complete this at home just as good practice. I give you a scenario here of what's happening to the plants. So this would be good practice for going through and picking out an independent variable, dependent variable, and control variable. We may go over this in class, but this is good practice for you at home. Also, here's another practice for you, identifying the scientific method. So again, you should be able to look at different examples and be able to pinpoint what part of the scientific method is occurring. So like number 1, as Susan said, if I fertilize my geranium plants, they will blossom. So this would be a good example of a hypothesis. She has an if-then statement. She's doing something. She's going to fertilize her geranium plants, and she expects them to blossom. We could probably make this a better hypothesis. So kind of think on your own, how could you make this hypothesis better? I'm not going to say it for you. I want you to think about it. How could you make this hypothesis even better? Okay, so these examples here, you can go ahead and read through them. I'm not going to read through each of them, but be able to apply the different steps from the scientific method. You need to be able to apply those steps to various examples like the ones that are given to you here. Alright, so I'm going to leave you with this. If you have any questions, please let me know in class. Please read lesson 1.2, also in Buzz. That will go into a little bit more detail than I went through in this lecture, but what I covered in this lecture, you're also expected to know. I'll see you in class. Thanks.